Hello and welcome. You're watching Connected. I'm Divya Gopalan. Let's not just let it go this time. Those are the words from a Taiwan TV drama that's been credited with kickstarting the country's Me Too movement.
我们的存在是让候选人站到浪头上，我们是造浪者。
The Chinese language show called Wave Makers has become an international sensation on Netflix. The show's sexual harassment plotline involving a young political staffer prompted real-life allegations within the ruling party, leading to resignations and exposing a culture of hushing up those who speak out. Now, since May, accusations have been brought against celebrities, political figures, academics, sports and culture leaders, and even human rights activists. Now, Taiwan is arguably one of the most gender equal places in Asia, so why is its Me Too movement only happening now? And will it lead to real change? To discuss this very important topic, we are joined by Darice Chang, who is an ambassador for the Women's March Taiwan and is joining us from Taipei, and JhuCin Rita Jhang, assistant professor at National Taiwan University, is joining us from Texas. Thank you very much, both of you, for joining this discussion. I'll first start with you, Darice. Tell us a little bit more about the Women's March and how that's played into the Me Too movement.
So we're Women's March Taiwan. So we are the Taiwan branch of the Women's March movement that came out of the United States after Donald Trump was elected in 2017. So we've been around since 2017, and we hold the annual Women's March in Taipei every single year. We also do some community events throughout the year to engage regular citizens with ideas surrounding feminism, gender equality, gender diversity, and other issues.
And Rita, tell us more about the work that you do. And I understand you have a podcast too on gender issues. Can you tell us how that's approached the Me Too movement?
Okay, so I am a project assistant professor in the global health program, but most of my research surrounds sex and sexual rights, sexual health, and I'm also an activist. I'm in the LGBTQ and women's rights movement. So my podcast is called the Z Green Party. It's not very intuitive, but this podcast started out as a show to talk about social issues and politics, but it slowly kind of geared toward my expertise, which is gender issues. So when we started out, there were a lot of gender issues we wanted to talk about, but then slowly we were worried that, well, maybe we would run out of things to talk about. Oh, but it's wrong, right? There are always something about gender, almost every single day. There are just endless topics about, gender issues in Taiwan to talk about. So that's basically what we're doing in our podcast show.
Indeed, there's so much to talk about, and often it's not even talked about enough. Gender issues are often swept under the rug. So, Darice, can you tell us about the role of Wave Makers, this show that we just featured in the intro? What was it about that show that suddenly sparked this movement here?
I think we needed a very specifically Taiwanese piece of popular media to start the conversation on the island. Because, for example, we've been pushing Me Too since it started in the United States. And as we've seen, it hasn't taken off in Taiwan all of these years. It's actually taken off in China, in Korea, in Japan, other surrounding nations a lot more than it has here. And so I think what we really needed was an example of how Taiwanese society is supposed to respond to sexual harassment allegations. And I think the show did a very good job. Additionally, the quote that you used at the beginning of the show, like, we can't let this go. I feel like this is a very, very, very guanjin, so like a very important line of dialogue, because it it sort of like overcomes the typical response that a woman or someone who has experienced a Me Too moment will have as they're trying to seek justice for what has happened to them. I think because Taiwanese society, like, we really value harmony. We value giving face. So when something happens at our place of work or in a group that we belong to, like sexual harassment, it's sort of seen as like a negative thing that can affect the reputation of the group in a bad way. And so a lot of times victims will choose to keep their silence or will not pursue like legal or reporting at all because they feel like, oh, I should be, suppressing this or holding this to myself for the sake of the group.
Right. And Rita, if I could get you to continue that train of thought, the whole idea of people not talking about this enough, and especially given that you have been trying to get people to talk about this with your podcast and what your area of study is, why do you think it's taken Taiwan this long to get here?
Everybody knows that there are a lot of sexual harassments. There is gender imbalance in power in Taiwan. But I think one thing about why, like when Me Too happened in the United States in 2017, people were kind of waiting for it to happen in Taiwan, but it kind of didn't, right? And then in Korea, it happened and then they changed the law. But in Taiwan, since the early 2000s, we actually have, 3 major laws for gender equality, kind of protection of, gender harassment, anti-sexual harassment laws. So in a way that people kind of assume that since we have those laws, things cannot be bad, right? Because we have those laws since the early 2000s. It's been about 20 years. So I think the laws gives a facade that things are better in Taiwan compared to other places. So it kind of makes it even harder for the victims to speak up, because they'll be like, wait, we have those laws, and why don't you just use the laws to protect yourself? So when the legal structure were built up, but our society doesn't really follow, the society doesn't progress as much as the law, it creates a gap, and that's where the victims fall under.
I want to pick up on something you said here with statistics. You said that people think that the situation here is better than in other places. And if you look at these statistics from the Ministry of Labor, which conducted a survey last year, they found that 3.3% of female employees and 1.3% of male employees had experienced sexual harassment at work in 2022. That is far lower than many other countries. Darice, what do you make of those numbers? Do they paint a real picture?
Are they basing those statistics off of like people that report it? Because as I understand, the Modern Women's Foundation recently released a report where they found that 78% of women who experience sexual harassment in the workplace choose not to report. So I feel like the actual statistics are much higher.
Rita, what is your take on those numbers?
Those are definitely underreporting, significantly underreporting. I personally know so many victims of sexual harassment in the workplace that choose or were not able to report because of fear of repercussion, because of they're just so tired, right? They're like, I can't fight this anymore. So because the legal system, the reporting system that we have now make it almost impossible for the victim to actually file a report, because it's usually, it is their employer that have to start in the investigation. But a lot of time is the higher up in the company that do the harassment, right? So when the victim file the report, and then they still have to continue working, and even though the law requires that, the accused and then the accuser will have to be separated during the time of the investigation, is usually the weaker one, right? The less powerful one that have to, temporarily leave the work. And if they file a sexual harassment report, a lot of time that would turn into workplace bullying. And so I would say those numbers are significantly underreporting.
Right. I have a very relevant example of what you are talking about. Now, this movement started on social media and is also fueled by social media. And one of the most high-profile Me Too cases in Taiwan is no exception. In early June, Yu Fenlai posted a long and detailed story on Twitter in which she accused the then deputy director of the Polish office in Taipei of sexual assault. Now, the alleged perpetrator has also issued his public statement on the same platform. Now, so I want to come back to you about this. I know this would be a case that would be familiar to both of you, given that it was very high profile and it created a lot of conversation. So going back to you, Rita, on this whole idea of how it is difficult for someone to report what's happened to them, let's talk about why they are taking to social media now. Do you believe that this is the outlet, the only outlet that they can be given to get to have their say on a platform?
I would say probably. And that's why when Me Too started in the US in 2017, some people call it the fourth wave of feminism, right? Now we have a tool of social media that gives so much power to the voiceless. And some of the people that I know are experiencing workplace sexual harassment. Sometimes they joke about there's nothing I can do now, but I'll hold on to the evidence. Maybe when I am fine, I'm finally powerful enough, I will talk about it on social media. So they kind of see it as like my last resort, right? Like my last chance of any kind of justice, because the legal justice system, make it very difficult for the victims to, file a report, to actually get anything back. So for them, this kind of social justice kind of approach is what they're counting on if they are not able to do the other route.
So if we follow this case, she actually did file, and the prosecutors in Taiwan have dismissed JhuCin Rita's case, saying that the victim's behavior after the incident was inconsistent with that of a sexual assault victim. What does that mean, Darice?
I think this is a classic example, a very unfortunately classic example of how the social environment in Taiwan does participate in a lot of victim blaming. So we have this sort of like perfect victim mentality where we feel like, if you are the victim of sexual harassment or assault, you should be screaming, you should be kicking, you should be yelling, all of these very aggressive responses that we expect from someone when they're experiencing this. But as we have seen, this is not the case, especially in this case. So as Rita brought up previously, a lot of these Me Too incidents are due to what we would call power imbalance. So there is someone with a lot more resources and then someone with a lot less resources, and it's usually the person with less resources being harassed. So in that case, this person cannot respond in an aggressive way. Like if you look at JhuCin's story, she very specifically, she was even doubting herself in that moment. She was like, why am I apologizing to him? Like, why am I keep telling him like, oh, we should be friends? Like, can we just go back to the way things were before? Because this is a very difficult position to be put in. This person, the former ambassador to Taiwan from Poland, obviously has a lot more power and prestige. He's very important to her in her career. And so she can't just, have this classic expected victim response.
So Rita, in that case, when a court says the person did not act like a victim and then does not consider the case, what do you think that does to other people who may have been considering reporting their sexual assault experience or speaking out on it?
I think it definitely has a silencing effect, right? People are watching and say, okay, if her case, to me, it so obviously was rape. But because of this and that pieces of evidence, the court decided that no, in my eye, this is not rape, right? This is not even, something that I would consider. So anyone who's watching, maybe someone who's a victim, will feel less inclined to say something, right? Not just to go to the legal route. Maybe they wouldn't even tell anybody what happened to them because they're afraid that this is how other people are going to respond to my trauma. They're going to, question me. They're going to, pin it on me. They're going to blame me for what happened to me. And also for people who might be perpetrating sexual harassment or sexual assault, for them, that's also a very powerful message that, as long as I can, do this and do that, I can get away with it. And then for bystanders who are not victims, who are not perpetrators, for bystanders, I think that also creates a very clear message that, victims are not to be believed. So I think that core ruling is I wish that there's more that we can do about this case. Yeah, but I think right now, because a lot of victims, when they accuse their perpetrators, they get sued by their perpetrators, of, I don't know, defamation or something.
And that's very, very scary and disturbing. And so we asked lawyer Sunny Lin what kind of evidence is needed for a prosecutor to file a criminal case. Take a listen.
The testimony of the victim is needed. Besides this, physical examination reports, interaction with the sexual offender, and reactions of the victims are also usually used in those cases. Due to objective evidence usually being lacking in a lot of sexual assault cases, the testimony of the victims becomes very important. However, the legal profession's understanding of the sexual assault situation can be very insufficient, and they may still process certain stereotypes. For example, the victims may not fight back and run away immediately due to the shock response, which also called freeze response, which often happens in the real crime scenes. Like the victim will get shocked and they cannot react immediately.
So Darice, when you listen to that, what does that say to you about encouraging victims to go to court or take their complaints up to a higher level where they can really punish the perpetrator?
So actually, a group of NGOs and the Taiwan Bar Association has created a legal coalition to help the victims of Me Too in light of the recent allegations that have come forth because of wave makers. So I feel like that is something that people can take advantage of, because they did find that, like, yes, a lot of people are not reporting because they are afraid of the legal repercussions, as Rita mentioned, and also like the fact that, like, the court system still holds on to a lot of these very outdated stereotypes of what victims should look like is very problematic.
So Rita, what kind of defenses, and I know this is something you've been talking about in your podcast, but what kind of defenses do you hear, not just legally, but within institutions, or of how perpetrators are allowed to get away with their actions, like the defense that society gives them?
I think it ties to misogyny and a lot of victim blaming. Just like if there is a perfect victimhood, like it's a perfect victim image that we wrongfully believe, then it's actually very difficult to fit that stereotype, the perfect victim. Then it's easy for the perpetrator to say, well, if she acts like this, if she acts like that, that means I'm not wrong. And a lot of time is, well, if she dresses like a certain way, right? If she's not wearing a bra, then that's she asking for trouble. I'm using, a he/she binary for the sake of easy, like simpler conversation, but there are male victims and female perpetrators too.
And what's so worrying about all of what you've said, Rita, is often that allows the perpetrator to get away with it, but yes, legislation is changing. And Darice, I want you to take us through how this legislation change could lead to perhaps a stronger message against those perpetrators, against any sexual misconduct, be it in the workplace or within society.
There are a couple of amendments that the Executive Yuan has brought up for the current special legislative session that do seek to improve many of the conditions of the current laws, so the 3 laws that Rita mentioned previously. They include, for example, increasing the punishment for people who reveal the identity of the victim during the investigative process. They also are taking a more victim-centered approach. So, for example, if you are harassed at your workplace, that the employer is not legally allowed to suspend or terminate your employment. However, there are several issues with this, especially in cases where, for example, the employee may not be a permanent employee, they may be a contractor or part-time or something like that. And also in cases where there is not a formal working contract. So this happens much more in the arts and entertainment sphere. which is something that the current laws do not really cover. And the amendments also do not solve all of the problems, all of the loopholes with the current laws, such as when someone reports in the workplace, management is supposed to do investigation and self-introspection. However, as Rita has noted, and as we all understand, a lot of times it is management or people in higher positions of power who are the perpetrators of gender violence. And so that's sort of like, telling them that, you're the work person doing it, but you also have to punish yourself. So I think the New Power Party has come out with 5 different issues that they have with the current amendments, and this is one of them. They're saying that we need to have a third-party investigator and someone else outside of the company to oversee the investigation so that this sort of thing does not occur, because it is pretty common currently. So even if the victim does report, if the report goes through, it still is this loophole in the current laws.
Mm-hmm. So, as you said, there are so many other issues that are not being addressed with the legislation. I mean, I think it's the focus at the moment is on just tougher punishment, using the stick approach. So, Rita, even though there will be tougher punishment for perpetrators and larger fines, longer jail terms, how will that encourage victims to speak out, though, if the process is not really changing?
Yeah. So just like Darice just said, right, in the workplace, if it's your higher up that's doing the harassment and you have to report to the higher up, and it just creates like a very predicament for the victim. So, right, so can we create a structure where the victim can directly report to an external investigative body, right, not their employee, not their employers. And another thing is, right now, the ruling party is talking about, making the punishment, like more punishment, longer sentence and stuff like that. But it's a really punitive justice approach. But for a lot of the victims, especially those who are sharing their stories, for those whose, perpetrators, like the sexual harassment or the sexual assault, it's already past the statute of limitation. So for them, a lot of them, they're not trying to punish that specific person, that they're trying to find some of, peace of mind. They're trying to find their own empowerment. They're trying to do, sort of restorative justice approach, right? They want to see transitional justice. But right now, we're only talking about punishment. But can punishment, well, sometimes the punishment of the perpetrator can bring some peace to the victims and other people, but that shouldn't be the only approach. So I'm just thinking whether there's room for other type of justice. But right now, the discussion of the ruling party is mostly on punitive justice.
Yeah, it certainly feels like it's all being rushed very much, and it's a knee-jerk reaction. And in fact, there are some other aspects of abuse and assault that are being ignored. And I know, Darice, you in particular are focusing on one of them, which is stalking. Can you explain how that issue is playing in Taiwan, to what extent, and why that isn't being addressed?
Yeah, so actually it's one of our members at Women's March, Karita Lin, who actually participated in the process of getting the stalking and harassment laws passed in Taiwan, because she herself is actually a survivor of stalking. And Taiwan didn't have anti-stalking laws before 2018. So this is a very recent thing that has happened. And even now, the laws are quite lacking because police don't really want to take responsibility for this. For example, we were hoping that the stalking laws would be like the police can issue a restraining order or something, which is how it usually happens in different countries. So the victim would go to the police and say, hey, this person has been stalking me. Like, this is their license plate. This is their, I know who they are, because a lot of times you do know who the perpetrator is. And then the police will have the authority to place a restraining order on this person. And if they break it, then obviously they can have a warrant for arrest. And so that resolves the issue. In Taiwan, this is not the case. So, for example, I do have a friend who has experienced stalking in Taiwan since the law passed. And even though they had all this information about the people, because she had like a group that was like stalking her, the police were not able to do anything. They were like, nothing violent has happened, so we don't really have jurisdiction. We can't step in. Or, like there's no demonstrated harm. Like people are following you around, and there's nothing in the law that says that they can't do that. So the current stalking and harassment laws are very, very weak. And we're hoping that citizens will actually come forward and speak up about this. Unfortunately, it does seem that very many people are not aware. And unfortunately, the Taiwanese government does have a history of not taking major action until it is quite severe. So for example, the current stalking and harassment laws had actually been in negotiations for several years, and it wasn't until a Malaysian student died at the hands of her stalker in Kaohsiung that the government finally decided to pass this law.
Well, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there. And this is where I say goodbye. And a huge thank you to our guests, Darice Chang in Taipei and Rita Jhang, who's speaking to us from Texas. But of course, we're continuing this conversation with both of you in the next episode on this very important topic, where we'll be looking at the Me Too movements in other countries and whether there are any takeaways for Taiwan. To our viewers, it's been great to have your company. Thank you and stay connected.